Hello and welcome to the Emma's for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. On today's podcast, we're going to do our monthly What Do You Want to Know Wednesday catch up with questions from you, my listening and watching audience. But before we dive into that, I want to highlight one of our wonderful podcast sponsors, Voetberg Music Academy. With the Voetberg way, you're not going to have to require your kid to practice hours a day. They're going to want to practice on a notes-based, song-based way of learning that helps them to jump right in and enjoy what they're doing. They can learn in piano, mandolin, fiddle, guitar, or ukulele. They can share lessons between siblings for way less than the hundreds of dollars a month for one child, for one instrument that so many people pay, especially using the code Emma's for Mama 20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled. You can also get badges and pins mailed directly to your door. Who doesn't like receiving happy mail? As kids are motivated to advance and to keep on learning using the Voetberg Music Academy way. Don't forget to use the code Emma's for Mama 20 for 20% off. I'd also like to highlight our podcast sponsor, Adel. Adel is a family-owned, Texas-based, proudly pro-life Christian company that features natural cosmetics and skincare. They focus on locally grown, nutrient-dense ingredients for their skincare, and I personally use them and love them. You can use the code Emma's for Mama for 25% off your first order. I highly recommend their moisturizing foundation, and you can actually follow Adel on Instagram. I'll put their username in the show notes for tips and tricks on how to use their products. Okay, as always, and this is a crowd favorite, we are doing our once a month feature of your What Do You Want to Know Wednesday questions that you ask me, and they range from just fun and light ones to deep and theological to things about miscarriage, to things about marriage, to things about pretty much everything in between. And so we're going to dive right in with a really lighthearted question. I get questions about skincare, products, energy, links for clothing, vitamin supplements, all the things all the time, because we all kind of want the shortcut, right? We want to know what someone loves, what worked best for them, if they have a discount code for it, how to get the best deal on it. I totally get it. This person asked me how I have all the energy to do all the things because they're struggling. And this is a question that I have been asked for years. I will say that my first and foremost answer is that I am a naturally energetic person to a very great extent. I think that is helped greatly by the fact that I have taught fitness classes. And if I haven't taught fitness classes, I've been active in either some sort of sport or some sort of group fitness exercise or weight training or running. Or anyone that knows me is like, you ran? Yes, I actually used to run. I'm not a fan of running now, but I used to actually enjoy it more. Things like that. Basically, since I was very young, I remember doing T-ball when I was 6, and I have never stopped doing some sort of physical activity. I've been a fitness instructor for almost 18 years. Wow. That went by really quickly. And I think that the movement of my body and fueling it with nutrient-dense foods are two of the biggest things that have helped me maintain energy through pregnancies. And yes, I've exercised throughout pregnancies. And yes, I have been really tired sometimes and made myself do it anyway, because when you're an instructor, you have to show up. You can't just say, I don't feel like it. So I think that kind of accountability for myself has been beneficial. But I will say this. The answer of I'm a naturally energetic person who has gleaned a lot of energy from exercising, which is an evidence-based response, by the way. Research shows over and over again that even though it seems like you don't have enough energy to exercise, when you actually get your body moving, get your endorphins up, get your heart rate pumping, especially if you can go out in the sunshine, you get a return of more energy consistently. And so that's not just my spitting in the wind on that one. But I have found that as I get older and have even more demands on my time than I did when I had only young children, I still have young children, but when I only had young children, I find that I have been looking quite intently for options for supplements or clean energy boosts that have helped me out. And so I will mention one to you that I will put in the show notes as something that I have used for about 3 months that has been really beneficial. And I have my husband taking it and my son drinking it. It's called Happy Juice, and I'll put the link for it there if you want to check it out. But it has gut health benefits. It has mental clarity benefits. It has mood stabilizing benefits, and it definitely has energy benefits. For me, the main things that I've noticed is that I have sustained calm energy throughout the day, that I don't crash at 2 p.m. when I'm trying to read aloud to my kids. In fact, I can prove that because I just, right before this podcast started, finished reading aloud to my kids. And when I read in that 2 to 4 range, a lot of times I am so sleepy because I've spent all this energy, doing all the mom things and the homeschooling things up to that point. And then I sit down and my body's like, okay, time for a nap. And I read and was not tired. So that's been really helpful. And then I also feel like digestive regularity and some mental clarity, just kind of less fuzzy brain things have been what I've seen the most as far as the benefits. So that would be my answer for now. Natural energy, exercise, but also supplements are nice when you need them, if you can find something that's good for you and clean. And by clean, I mean that it has natural products instead of synthetic products, and that you're not relying on massive amounts of caffeine or sugar or some other stimulant to hop you up for an hour or so to make it through. So that's my definition of that. So the next question is one that I get asked a lot. People ask me a lot of questions about our house, especially those that know that we built it ourselves and designed it ourselves. We didn't have a blueprint. We didn't buy one from an architect. We actually came up with everything in our house ourselves. And so they're like, what were your top tips for designing? And one of the biggest things that I get asked is how many bedrooms we have. So I'll have to count them in my head really quickly. Technically, for it to be a bedroom, it has to have a closet. And so one of the things that I'm listing as a bedroom wouldn't count as a bedroom on a blueprint, but people sleep there. So I'm going to count it as a bedroom. So we have our nursery, and Titus takes his naps and sleeps in there. And then we have what we call the toddler room, which is a little room at the top of our stairs that we have a couple of toddler beds in that we have transitioned young children through. Several of them, actually. Honor was a baby when we moved into this house, and he has slept there. Shiloh has slept there. And now Titus and Toby, well, they slept together for a little while, but they weren't going to bed super early in the evenings. So we had to separate them. And I'm sure they'll go back to sleeping together in there in the future. And so it's been a really nice transition room. It's a pretty small room, like I said, right at the top of our stairs. That's our second bedroom. We have our master, of course. And then we have a girls' wing and a boys' wing where we have 4 beds. We have bunk beds built into the wall on each side, and they mirror each other on opposite sides of the upstairs. There is a room in front of them that we call the playroom, but for the boys, there's a lot of exercise equipment. There's a couch in there. There's some desks with computers for schoolwork. For the girls' side, they have sewing things. They have a craft desk. They have dressers in there for their clothes. And then we have the sleeping rooms behind those. If we ever needed to convert those into bedrooms for older kids, we could, obviously. Now, they would have traffic going through their bedrooms to get to the bunk beds behind them, but still, that is always an option because both of those rooms are fairly decent sized. And so we have a lot of room sharing going on. We have 3 of the bunk beds taken in the girls' room because we have 3 girls. And then we have all 4 boys all 4 of our youngest boys that are not our adult son in the boys' wing of the bunk bed situation. And then we have a guest room downstairs, and we have converted that into a bedroom for Ezra. And if guests ever come, we will figure it out. It's not that we never have guests, but it's not super common. And so, or at least overnight guests. And so we will be able to adjust if we need to. Obviously, he could go back upstairs to the front room in front of the bunk beds, the ones we call the playroom, and sleep there. And someone could have the guest room for however long they needed it. And then we could switch around. So we're flexible, but I guess that means we have 2 bunk rooms, a nursery, a toddler room, a master, and a downstairs guest room that Ezra is now using. So 6 total, although one of those would not qualify as a bedroom in blueprints usually because it doesn't have a closet. All right, here's a question that someone asked me several weeks in a row. So I'm going to answer it here, and it's going to be a very niche following because it's a very specific question about the pickleball rules. She said she's having trouble understanding the rules for the kitchen in pickleball. And maybe it's not so niche because pickleball is growing so quickly that maybe you too are getting into playing pickleball and you're having trouble understanding the rules. So in pickleball, there is a section right in front of the net called the kitchen, and you cannot be inside your feet, your something that's on your body cannot be inside the kitchen. In fact, I will say this is kind of a rule that a lot of people don't know, but if something falls off your body into the kitchen, it counts as a part of your body being in the kitchen. So the other day I played a match And I'm not entirely sure why it's called the kitchen. I've never looked that up, but this little section in front of the net that you can't be in, I'll give you the rules for when and why you can't be in it in just a second. I actually was playing a very windy game in a tournament in women's doubles, and I went up for an overhead slam, and the exertion of going up and pulling my paddle down kind of knocked my hat that I was wearing loose, and the wind started to pull it off. So I took it off and threw it. We finished the point and won the point, and then we won the game. And it is 100% the responsibility of the players when there is no referee present to call any infractions of rules during the game. And so you just call them as honestly as you can, like if the ball is in or out, or if someone is in the kitchen or whatever. And so as I was walking away, the club owner, who is an avid pickleballer himself, actually said, he's British, he said, Abbie, you should probably know that your hat went in the kitchen because the wind blew it back in. And I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't notice. Nobody else noticed. And so it's not the kind of thing where you go back and say, oh no, my hat was in the kitchen. We didn't actually win that point, because it's the responsibility of the other team to call any infractions. But I didn't see it and no one else did. But Rob was standing there saying, oops, you broke the kitchen rule. So when does it matter that you're in the kitchen? It matters if the ball is in the air and has not hit the ground yet. So if someone hits a volley, which is where it's coming over and hasn't hit the ground yet, and you reach in to hit the volley back without letting it bounce, and some part of you, including your hat, or the craziest example I've heard of is that in a fairly high up tournament, like a pro level tournament, someone had a sticker on their paddle that had been put there by the event managers as like here's your official sticker as being part of this event. They hit the ball and the sticker fell off their paddle into the kitchen, and they noticed and they were penalized and they didn't get the point, even though they won the point, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, but it is in line with these kind of strict rules about the kitchen. So if the ball is still in the air and you lean in, your upper body can lean over the kitchen line as long as your toes are behind it and nothing falls off of you into it. And that's the rule for staying out of the kitchen. That's it. If the ball bounces first, like let's say the ball bounces barely over the net and you step forward into the kitchen to hit it, as long as it's already bounced, you are golden. No problem. If something falls off of you into the kitchen, doesn't matter. The ball isn't in the air when it's being played. So hopefully that clears that up. And for those of you that were wondering, you are all set. For those of you that weren't wondering, don't know what pickleball is, and cannot figure out for the life of me why we keep talking about kitchen and things falling into it, we're moving on to another question. We're good. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so next up, we have a question that I've been asked actually several times recently. It's funny to me. I think I've talked about this before on my social media. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it here, but there is this phenomenon that I have seen, and I've talked about this in the context of a word called reticulation. I think I've mentioned this here on the podcast before, but if I haven't, I will quickly recap it. Reticulation is when you notice something for the first time and then all of a sudden that something becomes extremely ubiquitous, at least in your mind. So let's say that you notice a vintage Volkswagen Bug, and all of a sudden you see Volkswagen Bugs, especially vintage ones, everywhere. It doesn't mean that Volkswagen Bugs, vintage Volkswagen Bugs, suddenly cropped up everywhere and they weren't there before. It means that your consciousness has become more aware of them and suddenly notes them everywhere you go. So another thing that I've noticed, and this is not the same thing, but, and maybe it's reticulation or a form of it, but I think it's probably more like themes within culture, is that with movies, think Shakespeare in Love and Elizabeth, or The Thin Red Line and Saving Private Ryan, or Bug's Life and Ants. A lot of times there are themes of movies or things that come out and you notice, oh my goodness, I keep seeing this theme everywhere. Now, part of that is I'm sure that they do market research and what people are interested in. And it seems lucrative to make this movie. And then one production company is going to do it. And then another one says, we need to have an answer to that. Or, who knows? Maybe they simultaneously decide to have two animated movies about ants and then are shocked. But it kind of seems like somebody leaked the idea. So you have these themes that crop up. And I address all of that because it feels like the same thing when it comes to what do you want to know Wednesday questions. It feels like if I notice this particular question, it's all people want to ask about. Or conversely, everybody else colluded somehow and I didn't know about it. And they all decided they were going to ask the same question. I kid you not. It will be about room sharing one week. It will be about home birth the next week. It will be about how to talk to your kids about homosexual ideologies the week after that. It'll be about, a particular link to a product that I've talked about. And all of a sudden everyone asks me, now that one makes more sense if I've talked about it recently, but sometimes I'll feel like I haven't talked about it in a while. It'll crop back up. So I can't explain to you why it seems there's this collision of questions when it comes to certain themes. But this next one is one that I've been asked a lot recently. And that is, have any of your children ever attended one of their siblings' births? So if you haven't listened to my birth stories yet or watched my birth stories yet, you absolutely should. It's so fun. Just to kind of hear about people's different life experiences. And if you're a birth story junkie, you're going to get a kick out of all of my birth stories, which I have here on the podcast. I also have them on my blog as well. I'll put those in the show notes if you're a reader more than a listener. Although if you're here, you're probably a listener. And so you know that I do home births and that I've had one birth center birth and then 2 hospital births. Well, technically 3, but 2 at one time with my second set of twins being in the hospital. And so obviously they wouldn't be allowed to attend hospital births, but they could have attended the home births. Here's the deal. I am a necessary personnel only type of gal, to the point that when I had to have my second set of twins in the hospital, and by have to have, it's because my midwife wasn't delivering multiples at home anymore. And then I had co-care with a traditional OBGYN and the hospital required me to deliver in an OR. And a certain amount of medical personnel had to be in the room per their safety guidelines. And it was like 15 people. And I am used to delivering with my husband, a midwife, and the required midwife's assistant there. That's it. Or in the case of my other set of twins that I delivered at home, it was legally required that there be 2 midwives and 2 midwives assistants present. And that was the most amount of people I'd had in the room up to the point when there were suddenly 15 people in the room in the OR. Well, my OBGYN knew that I wasn't a huge fan of having everybody kind of standing around waiting for me to have a baby. And so there were a ton of people in masks and gowns behind me that I couldn't even see. And somehow, while it was fine, and by that point I didn't really care who was in the room because I just wanted to get these babies out of my body, it was very strange to realize I had kind of this audience behind me trying to be respectful and stay out of my space, but all kind of hovering there. So I'm just not interested in having a whole lot of people present to watch me give birth. I know some people love that. It's just not my jam, but also I don't have fast births. And, there have been times when I was dilated to like a 9 and had pushing urges, and then I didn't have a kid for another 8 hours because everything slowed down again. So I'm afraid it's trying to attend one of my births, especially the very end where you're actually pushing a baby out, would be a bit anticlimactic because you might end up there and then have to go home again. Also, my body is not very reactive, I wouldn't say, to most things in life. I don't respond strongly to sugar. I don't respond strongly to caffeine. I don't respond strongly to other stimuli. But when it comes to labor, my body is extremely reactive in a very frustrating way, in that if it feels like something has changed, it just stops contracting. I could be, like I said, at a 9 and suddenly we're just chilling and talking instead of super intense because my body was like, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna. I think so. Having more people in the room, I think, would make my body even tenser or more likely to shut itself down and be like, you know what, we'll just wait. We're feeling a little shy. We don't want to do this right now. And I feel like it takes so long anyway. I definitely don't want to chance that. So no, thank you. I will keep delivering with my husband and the midwife and the assistant in the room. And should I ever have any more children? That is all I've done up to this point, unless forced to do otherwise. And should I have any more children, that is what I would choose again. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. Someone asked a couple of questions that are pretty specific, but the first one they asked was about whether our church budget was available for viewing by anyone. And at first I was kind of like, do you want to view our church budget? I don't understand why you would. But then they had a follow-up question that basically said, is it a red flag if only the church elders are able to see the church's budget? And I would say yes. I don't know that it's a red flag like you stomp out and leave the church or anything like that, but it is a huge responsibility to be the elder of a church. The Bible's really clear on the requirements for being an elder. And one of them is integrity. And in all things, like you could extrapolate that into all areas. And integrity often involves transparency about things like money. And so, yes, our church's budget is actually printed in the bulletin each week. And if there were kind of this hush hush, nobody else can know, even though you're the ones, contributing the money in your tithing, that would probably be something that would raise a pretty big red flag for me and my husband, for sure. Okay, this is a great one, especially considering I was talking about how exercise is such a great way to boost your energy. This is someone who is 10 months postpartum, and they are asking about tips for how to ease into exercising as a first-time newbie to intentional exercising. And I will say that if I were to give anybody first-time exercising advice, postpartum not, especially 10 months postpartum, I would say start with reasonable expectations. Walking is a great place to start. Consistently walking 20 to 30 minutes a day is a wonderful place to start. But especially for women, we want to get where we're doing load-bearing exercises because it helps us to build bone density, which is something that gets chipped away at by hormones and age, and it makes you more likely to break when you are older if you trip or fall down or bump into. I have friends, or at least acquaintances, who have broken their feet by stepping into a room and or stepping on an extension cord, and all of a sudden they've got a broken foot. So our bones can be fragile no matter what, but we want to do things that help build bone density, and strength training is the main thing that's going to do that. And it's really intimidating for women, especially if they haven't done it. Fortunately, there's a lot more resources with social media than there were when I started strength training 25 years ago. And you have all of these accounts like Nourish, Move, Love. I'll put these accounts in the show notes. Get Mom Strong, Deliciously Fit and Healthy, Good for the Swole. There are all kinds of accounts available that are tailoring their workouts and specifically their strength training regimens for moms. And they're taking into account things like pelvic floor stability and rebuilding your core if you've had diastasis recti after having a baby, which is the separation of your transverse abdominis muscles, which are kind of the deep core muscles that hold everything together. So you want to make sure that you are being mindful of those kinds of things, especially if you're a mom, because you don't want to cause damage to the whole pelvic floor area, which has so many muscles and ligaments and things attached, which control so many other things and can really cause you a lot of pain in the future if you're not careful. So things like heel slides, which I'm not really going to go into in depth, but that's just a very basic strengthening exercise for your abs and helping you build back up to something more intense, would be a great place to start instead of just doing planks and crunches and things like that. Starting with walking instead of running. Like I said, I'm not a runner. I don't love running. I don't think it's a necessary thing. And also, I would say finding something that you love. If a walk in the sunshine outside, if you can find some sunshine this time of year, with a good book in your ears, sounds like heaven to you, then it's probably going to motivate you to go do it. If lifting weights with some Toby Mac blasting in your headphones sounds motivating to you, then go for that. I really do suggest the weight training no matter what, but you don't have to start heavy. You don't have to be some sort of beast and do some sort of complicated exercises. Some dumbbells and some squats can go a long way toward helping you with longevity, toward helping you with bone density, toward helping you with functional strength. Think lifting your child, leaning over and picking them up out of the bath or putting them down in their crib, picking up heavy household items and moving them around without needing help. All of those things are what strength training is perfect for. So that would be my suggestion. And like I said, I'll put those counts in the show notes so that you can check those out and hopefully find some workouts that work for you. Okay, someone else wanted to know if we have gotten any snow this year. They just moved to Texas and they are extremely unimpressed with the snow. My children would be extremely impressed if it would snow, and it is not cooperating at all. It is actually quite chilly here today, the day that I'm recording this. I think it's the low of like 17 or something like that. And that's Not completely unusual for January in East Texas, but it doesn't last for very long. I will say this. One of the reasons I would be quote unquote unimpressed with Texas, depending on which part of it you've moved to, but especially in East Texas where it's quite humid, in the wintertime, especially if you come from somewhere with snow, is that you probably are a little annoyed by the fact that at 17 degrees in Texas, the temperature feels more biting and more uncomfortable than, say, 0 degrees in Colorado, because Colorado's climate is so much drier. I remember we went to Colorado about 5 years ago for a family trip in the fall, and they had a very early snow. And there was like a foot of snow, and we got to build snowmen and cavort around in it and play. And it was so fun for us. I mean, I'm sure the Coloradoans were like, ho hum, this started earlier than usual, but we loved it. And I remember one day my kids were outside playing, and I knew that it was 7 degrees according to my phone, but they were outside playing in shirt sleeves. And I remember going out there to be like, guys, put your jackets on. And it was cold, but it really wasn't bad. It wasn't biting and kind of just seeping into your skin like I feel it does here. Again, we don't have it for very long, but while we have it, it is kind of an uncomfortable cold. The short answer to your question after all of that is that we do not have any snow. If we had some precipitation right now, we would, because it's quite cold, but no precipitation right now. So you must be farther north than we are, or in some other part of Texas that gets snow, like West Texas. We're in East Texas, and it is it's not unheard of, but it's rare. And then even if we do get snow, it very rarely sticks on the ground. So we technically have had snow this year, maybe last week or the week before, where there were some flakes falling through the air and the kids were catching them on their tongues, but they didn't even stick on the ground enough to be able to see that there was snow. So I'm sorry for your sake, since you were expecting there to be no snow, that you're unimpressed with the snow in Texas. But I guarantee you, unless you are in an area where it snows more than it does here, it won't last very long. And you should be back to nice and reasonable temperatures very soon. Alrighty, so this next question comes, I'm assuming, from someone who has recently had a baby, because they ask, how do you keep your marriage fresh and alive when you just had a new baby? So I'm going to be that weirdo that actually loves the way my marriage is right after I've had a baby. And I mean that like right after I have a baby. Because, and I will say this, just absolutely like recognizing that this is an incredible gift and not everybody has this, and I'm not rubbing it in your face, I promise, but because my mom has often been kind to keep our older children for at least a day, usually a couple of days when the new baby comes. And Sean and I will just like snuggle that baby, take naps together, watch shows together on the couch. I don't remember the last time I sat down and watched one of our favorite British detective series or anything like that. Like genuinely, it's been so long that I cannot remember the last time that was part of my life. So that would feel pretty luxurious at this point. And I realize that this is not just asking about the immediate days following having a new baby, but that part is always fun to me. Like I eat whatever I want because I need the calories. Sean takes some time off of work. We take turns holding the baby and just being obsessed with them, or each holding a baby if there's two of them at a time, and being obsessed with them and taking it slower. And we talk a lot, and I don't know. There's just something sweet about that bonding time of being parents of a new little human. I understand that there are also some limitations, obviously. And when you say fresh and alive, I don't know if you're primarily referring to romance or if you're just primarily referring to keeping some kind of connection going because you're both sleep deprived and babies are a lot of work. But I think it all comes down to perspective. We have had it, if not rough, we've had it challenging. Our second set of twins were not easy babies. They were not the hardest babies, and hard is not the same thing as bad, even if they were, but they were challenging. They did not sleep for very long stretches at all. They were pretty fussy during the day. They didn't have any NICU time, and they were great sizes. Well, especially the larger one was almost 7 pounds when he was born, and his brother was a little under 5.5 pounds. And so, but I had to feed them a lot to make sure they were gaining weight. So it felt like I was just breastfeeding constantly. And so I'm not just talking from a place of an easy postpartum experience. My body was really recovering from that one, 9th and 10th kids. and had some weird post-epidural complications. Don't think I'll ever get another epidural. Just some things like that definitely complicated things. But I feel like our perspective has always been, here's a challenge, let's face it together. And that helps so much. It helps to grow your communication. It helps to grow your appreciation for each other as you do things for each other. It helps to grow closeness over this shared kind of goal that you have in keeping this little human alive and loved and well as the other people in the house. You learn to communicate your needs. I'm just really struggling with this. I need a nap. Can you help with this? And it's not all just the mom saying, can you help with this? Sometimes, even though you're the one that just had the baby, you're the one that's helping him in some capacity. And that's not a bad thing. So I feel like if you are focused on the fact that there's a new little life here, it's a lot of work, you're really tired, you're really stressed out, and you're so alone, then it can feel like your marriage is falling apart. But if you can both get on board, I realize that not everybody has a spouse that's going to get on board with this, but if you can both get on board with the concept of pulling together in the same direction, then it can be a really sweet time. And I've enjoyed all of our postpartum experiences from the marriage perspective in many ways, because even though there are always those rough patches and disagreements and arguments because you're both just way too tired, there's also lots of opportunities to find ways to lift each other up and help each other out and bond over the fact that you just created, God did, but you just helped participate in creating a new human being, and they're awesome. Alrighty, here's one for the homeschool moms, and I'm going to wrap us up pretty soon here because I have a basketball game to go watch. But this is from a homeschool mom who's asking how we let our kids have some choice in the homeschool day while still maintaining our authority as moms. I will be completely honest and say that my knee-jerk reaction to this is that my first priority is not to let my children have a lot of choice in a homeschooling day. My first priority is to teach them well and to engage with them well, and to, but there's at least a very large portion of get through the things that we need to get through, right? And if we're offering them too many choices, as we all know, we're all going to have different preferences, and then you've got kids squirreling off in all different directions and you don't get anything done. However, even though that's my knee-jerk reaction as far as my response, I look at what we actually do in a day, and we have our rhythms, which someone asked me about rhythms and what is a daily rhythm, how to establish daily rhythms. I actually have a whole podcast on that where I go into it in depth, and I think that would be really helpful for the person that asked that. So I'll have my son put the number for that. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but the number for that podcast in the show notes so that you guys can go check that out if you want to. But once you've established your rhythms, like let's say that we do math first, and then we do language arts, and then we get our handwriting done, and then we do a little bit of history, and we get our co-op work done. We have some lunch. If we've gotten to all of that before that, we may not have. And then we're going to have some free time, and we're going to do some read alouds. That's a typical rhythm for us. And one of the reasons why that's a typical rhythm for us is that I like to combine subjects so that I have multiple grades doing the same subject at the same time, so my brain can answer questions well in the same subject at the same time. So that means that I have people doing math at different levels at the same time at the table, or I have people doing language arts at different levels at the same time, so I can answer grammar questions from different age levels or math questions from different age levels instead of answering a history question and a math question and a science question and a grammar question, which kind of feels like my brain turns into scrambled eggs. So the areas in which I do offer them some choice, especially when they're older, is the order in which they do their co-op work. As long as they're being responsible and as long as they're being diligent to get the work done, they don't have to work in the same room that I'm in. They don't have to do every subject right under my nose by any stretch, nor do I want them to as they develop independence. They're welcome to find a quiet place to work upstairs, again, as long as they're working. And because they know this, they do consistently work, because if they're not working, then they have to come back and be right under my nose. I let them choose to some extent when they're going to do lunch and what they're having for lunch. If they are wanting to do a particular activity that I might have normally skipped, but they're like, oh, this sounds really fun to me, it's like, okay, let's do that activity. So I think there is some wiggle room there for sure. But I really feel like my job as their primary educator is to give them organizational skills, to give them time management skills, to give them the skills to learn how to establish their own rhythms and to follow them. And so being consistent instead of simply, nobody in the question said, how do we cater to their whims? But that we don't cater to their whims. Instead, we establish those parameters and then we give them wiggle room within the parameters that's reasonable. And that's going to look different for every family, what you consider reasonable. Our lunch table is chaotic. I'm okay with that, because I would rather supply the ingredients and or make the food and have leftovers and let people heat them up than to do what I have seen some moms do. And I am totally cool with the fact that they do it. It just doesn't work for us, which is where they make one lunch for their entire family and they line it up all on plates and everybody comes and gets it. That's fine. That's great. It makes way less mess than we make. But in our homeschool day, lunch is a free-for-all as long as you can make it for yourself and clean up after yourself. Otherwise, I'm making it for you and then you're helping me clean up if you're capable and old enough. So I would say that's an area that I provide a lot of freedom and a lot of agency for my kids. Less so when it comes to curriculum choices or what order we're doing things in or whether or not we're going to do this activity if I've said we're going to do it, which still maintains my authority as mom, but gives them some freedom in a particular area where I don't feel the need to micromanage, even though it creates a very messy island at lunchtime every single day. I'm okay with that. It works for us. Okay, the last one I'm going to answer is about natural family planning methods. I have a whole kind of breakdown of our ideology on this topic in my second podcast called Why We Have So Many Kids or something like that, where I talk about our philosophy of open-handedness and just kind of giving our fertility to the Lord. So I'm not going to be one that's like, thou shalt use this method or not use this method. The main things that I am willing to speak into specifically are, one, your heart posture. If your heart posture is one of fear, control, panic, or selfishness when it comes to children, I think that that's an opportunity as a believer to say, okay, Lord, am I doing this from a place of, just like it talks in James, if the Lord wills, this is what will happen, or whatever we do, may it bring glory to God, or casting all our cares upon him, or am I mostly doing this from a place of my hands are closed and I am terrified at the thought of having more children and I don't think that you'll provide and I don't think that I'll like it because it'll take, too much from me. Like, those are things that the world tells us. And so we have to take those and shine the light of scripture on them and make sure that they're aligning with God's word and with truth. So that would be the first thing that I would always encourage people to do if they're considering any form of natural family planning. And the second would be to make sure that you are not engaging with a form of prevention, if you're choosing prevention, that is an abortifacient. So chemical birth control pills, hormonal birth control, however you want to word that, has an element to it of making the lining of the uterus for the woman hostile to implantation. And it literally says it on the packaging. I'm not making that up. It says the 3 ways that it works, and that's one of them. Will that be the only way that it works? No. But if it's a possibility, then I would strongly urge Christians to consider a different method, because if they feel called to use a method of prevention, because we believe that life is sacred. And one of the 10 commandments is to not take an innocent life. And so we want to make sure that we're not doing that or engaging in something that could possibly do that. There are IUDs that work in much the same way. And so it's really important to do your research on any of those things to make sure that you're not flirting with the possibility of aborting human life unintentionally. So on that note, on that very light note, I'm going to wrap things up and say goodbye for now and chat with you guys again next week when I will have a very interesting and very cool guest for you. And until then, I hope you have a great rest of your week and are so blessed in everything you say and do as you seek to glorify God in each of those things. If you enjoy the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.